talking today about, I've kind of changed the title a few times. And what I've come up with is strategic curriculum vitae and track record development. So I'm going to talk about it in a couple of different ways. One, in terms of what you should be thinking about in terms of your strategic narrative and development of your career path, but then also how you put that on paper to demonstrate your worth, shall we say, because that's what it feels like you're doing every time you write a grant application. So first I thought I'd start by asking you guys a question. And that is why, I've just got to work out how to change this. Sorry, I'm not on my computer, but I'll be right from here on in. Why does your CV matter?
That means if you get a job or not.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's it. That's one reason it matters. Why else? Promotion, grant applications. L?
You're selling yourself.
You're selling yourself. Yeah. So a CV isn't something that you should just be putting together when you go for a job. It shouldn't be something you're throwing together when you're writing a promotion application. It's a living document that works with you for the duration of your career. It's part of the partnership. So it is pretty important. So I think, you guys got the answers there. It supports you in terms of your career progression, your funding, and your visibility. It tells your story, and it tells the story of your research journey. So that's important irrespective of what part of your career you're at. So if it's like very early career, you're going for your first job at McDonald's, your story is going to be very different to what it is if you're going for a promotion to a level E professor. But equally, they're important in terms of telling your story. And as I said earlier, it's a living document. So it really has to evolve with your goals. So your goals when you're going for that job at McDonald's are going to be very different to your goals for your promotion, obviously. So your CV's, of course, going to look very different. That's very simple. Who's your CV for? I think in the world that we live in, your CV's for funders, particularly NHMRC, MRFF, but also equally for TSANZ or professional body applications or HMRI or the university pilot scheme and things like that. But it's also for academic promotion panels, collaborators and job institutions. But for each of these different things, your CV might look quite different. So tailoring your CV is key to what you're actually using it for. And what's also important in terms of developing your CV is beyond developing your CV, but it's developing your career and building a strategic narrative. Now, Paola, I'm going to call on you because you just off the cuff in the 11 o'clock meeting told me your strategic narrative. So what's your narrative?
My narrative is to improve the engagement of people with asthma, to engage them more in physical activity and to find ways for them to increase in physical activity.
In order to?
In order to improve their outcomes.
Yeah. So Paola is a great example of having a very clear and focused strategic narrative. Dennis, what's your strategic narrative?
Improve the life of people with asthma.
Okay, so you can see Dennis is far more broad and wide wide ranging. And if I was to say it about me, I'd probably be a bit more like Dennis. So I think Vanessa Murphy, what's yours?
To change the practice of way asthma is managed in pregnancy and prevent asthma developing in the next generation.
Great. So Vanessa and Paola are very specific in their narrative. And I think that that's a really good way to be. Speaking from someone who's not. But so you want your CV, but you also want the development of your career to work out what your research program is. And while doing that, you want to work out, okay, so what's my strategic narrative for me to enhance, build, and excel in this research program? All the while you're thinking about this, so like I said, it's a lifelong journey. So you should be thinking about this Pay's a few months postdoc. She should be thinking about this now, so that she can map her career, her path to be the most competitive in her area of research that she can be. So what is your impact trajectory? So Paola's very nicely articulated what her research program is and what a strategic narrative is, but what's your impact trajectory? You may not have thought that far ahead. No. So thinking about this in terms of developing your CV is important. If I can kind of point out Dennis again. So Dennis has done a lot of work in digital health prior to coming here, in smoking cessation, got, drugs registered with the TGA in that area. Now is doing digital health in asthma, also doing remission work, and it may have like a bit of a digital focus there. So Dennis should be thinking, all right, with everything I've done so far, what's my impact trajectory? Like starting at when he did his PhD and got drugs registered with the TGA. I'm not sure if I'm telling exactly the accurate story for Dennis, but I'm trying to give an example. So that's where your impact trajectory is beginning, back here. And then you've got to build on that. And for those Vanessas in the room, I don't think anyone else just went through the process of submitting a investigator grant. That's exactly what we had to do for that. And I meant to put the impact cycle, research lifestyle. I meant to put the research life cycle in my slides, which kind of shows you where your impact should be throughout that life cycle. So it's important to think about this, think about it now, and actually plan for research impact so that you can be more successful in funding applications and further career progression. So I thought you were going to ask me a question, but so that also fits with the next point about how does that fit with your career vision. So your research program, your vision with the investigator grants, we had to very clearly articulate what our research vision was or is, and then how the work that we were going to do was going to enable us to achieve that research vision. So your vision might be for the next 6 months. It might be for the next 5 years. You might have a vision for both 6 months and 5 years. And I think when you're strategically developing a career in research, it's important that you do that. And I say strategically because in order to have a 7 CV, there is a lot of strategy to it. You could be very enthusiastic and, want to do work in all of these different areas, in asthma, in COPD, in bronchiectasis, in those diseases, in physical activity to biomarkers and biologics and things like that. So even if you're doing things like that, you still have to kind of then work out, okay, I need a vision. I need a vision so that I can define this pathway and be able to sell my story as the best person to do this job. And that job might be a job, a promotion, or a grant application. So it reflects your direction that you're going in and not just the journey that you've been on. And I think that's a really important point, because when you write your CV, you usually have it full of information about what you've done so far. But having where you're going in your CV within a narrative is also really important, okay? So it just shouldn't be a list of dot points. It should be a narrative, and building that strategic narrative allows you to do that. So how do you develop this clear narrative in your career? So I've talked a little bit about coherence. So using the examples of Paola and Vanessa, physical activity, asthma and pregnancy, very clear, know what you're doing, able to build that narrative around that. Mike's immune, like biomarkers, and clear to build that around that. Joyce's exercise, physical activity as well. So yeah, so you focus on the coherence rather than saying, I'm the best in the world at this, 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 and this, because you lack that coherence then. You want to build a recognizable research identity. What do people think of when they hear Vanessa Murphy? So Vanessa's got a perfect research identity. Vanessa's the most published author in the world on asthma and pregnancy. So I know that from her investigator grant. So her identity cannot be clearer, can it? And that's what's important for you to start building for your kind of track record development and CV development. And show your research trajectory. So, you know, I'm 14 years postdoc. Over the last 5 years, I've published 200 papers. In the 5 years prior to that, it was 50 papers. So there's a pretty clear trajectory, yeah? You can see how with time, your track record really develops, and then you sell that. So if we now think about the actual physical document, what are the core components of a CV? And I could be missing things here, but obviously publications, and I'm going to talk a bit more about quality and authorship position and coherence I've already mentioned. You'll have your grants and you'll identify what your role is. Don't just put that you got a grant. Put that you got a grant, you're a CIA, put it in bold in another colour, whatever, because your job here is to draw your attention to yourself, as Els put it, sell yourself. Put leadership and service. So all the committees that you're on, the societies, the peer review that you do. Now, it's not enough in an investigator grant to say, I'm on X, Y, Z committees. You've got to, like, what the reviewers will say for you there is, well, so what? What, you know, that just shows you might be good at attending meetings. You're going to say what your role is, what you contribute to that committee, why that committee wouldn't function if you weren't there, not in so many words, but, you know, for example, if I say I was the board director responsible with the education and training remit for the Thoracic Society. I then had to say what I did during that tenure that, you know, was directly responsible, that I was directly responsible for, rather than just being, you know, the chair of that committee, for example. How many peer reviews do you do? Do you peer review in X journals, average how many articles a year. So these are the metrics that you need to think about in terms of putting into your CV, rather than just say, I review for Lancet, ERJ, Thorax. Your narrative there might be, you know, I regularly review for high quality international journals, including Lancet, ERJ, ... I would review an average of X number of manuscripts per year. So that metric is important. Your collaboration, obviously you might have some narrative there around, you know, I have developed X international collaborations with people from ... These people are world leaders in ... Because most people that pick up your CV are not going to know, you know, the people that you're so grateful to be working with. For example, if they're reviewing your CV and they're from a completely different field, they're like, oh, so what? Who's this dude? Like, you know, so you've got to tell them. Joycey put in an application for something the other day, and she wrote something about a collaborator, and she actually put in brackets their field weighted citation index. And I thought that was a really nice way to say, this person's the bomb and I'm working with them. Yeah. All right. And then you want impact. So how do you actually put impact in your CVs? And again, this might be part of a narrative. It might be including policy changes and practice changes that have occurred as a result of your work. It might be media appearances and things like that. Your supervision, you would put that in there. So you'd put who your students are, what their title is, what supervisor are you, primary, co, awards that student may have won, grants that student may have won, and the duration of their PhD candidature. So it's not just listing a whole batch, but you're actually saying the quality of this student as well. And then presentations. So you want to put, your big time presentations in, your international and your national. And local as well, if you're early career. I don't put local in because I think I'd probably do too many for one thing. But I will put every national and every international presentation I have been invited to do. So not everyone I've done. So you might be invited to go to Switzerland to do this big time presentation, but your child's doing their HSC and you have to decline because that's not your priority today, for example. Doesn't mean you shouldn't put that on your CV because you've been invited. They've wanted you to be there. It's just that invitation is just as kind of prestigious as actually doing it. So make sure all those things go on. All right. So again, building your track records strategically. I spoke about publications and I said I'll come back to it because I just want to point out a few things around as you're developing your career, the things you should be thinking about in terms of your publishing. As an early career researcher, you want, and mid-career researcher, and anyone really, they want to have publications and, opportunities to be an author on a paper are too good to kind of pass up most of the time. Then when you start to go for an investigator grant, if you've got a publication record where you've got 500 publications, but you're first and senior author on 100 of them, you're going to get scored down for that. So you really need to strategically be thinking about your first and your senior authorship papers rather than a load of middle authors where it's hard to demonstrate, particularly as you advance in your career, what your actual role was and how are you the leader of this research if all your publications are in the middle. So remember that, and I often say this when I'm kind of talking to people, try and think about your workload from a primary work perspective, and I think I may have presented this at one of the other presentations I did, and then the secondary work perspective, for example. So what is it that's going to build you as the leader in terms of the research? And that's where you want to focus most of your energies. Of course, you want to be a good collaborator. And of course, you want to kind of work with other people, but you don't want that outweighing your primary work. So both are very important. And it also depends on what your end goal is, what your vision is, what your strategic narrative is. For example, Kelly, do you want to be a professor?
No.
Okay, so Kelly's first and last authorship papers may not be as important as Paola. Do you want to be a professor?
Yes.
Yes. So very different visions, very different trajectories. So you have to focus very differently on your publication record. Okay. And also think about primary data over review articles. So primary data are more weighty. Review articles might get cited better. You might have higher field-weighted citation indexes for your review articles. But then, for example, if you go for your investigator grant on your way to professor and you put 5 review articles in that have a field weighted of 25 and then 5 papers where you're in the middle, they're going to say, nah, this is a 4, not a 7. Yeah. Now, we can't, at different stages of our career, all have 10 first senior paper authors in your top 10 that have field-weighted citation indexes of 60 or whatever it might be. There'll be different stages of your career where you'll have kind of different quality and impactful publications. And similarly, there'll be different stages in terms of your grant success. So as baby researchers, the early career researchers, you're going to start with smaller grants, the college grants, the professional society grants. You're not going to, Paola, I'm picking on a lot, but she's not going to kind of finish a PhD in September, graduate now, and then say, I'm going to submit an NHMRC grant next week. That's not how it works. It takes time to build up to that. And the more you build up with those smaller pilot grants through HMRI, as I said, professional societies, whatever's on offer, the more you can then build competitiveness in reaching those bigger grants. And I've said, you want to log on your CV, your supervision, service activities, presentations. And I say that because I remember I didn't do all that for some time. And I didn't kind of highlight, whether it was a keynote, whether it was a plenary, whether it was, an abstract and things like that. I didn't realise there was importance in that. So just in case anyone is as naive as I was, that's information that you need to know. All right, another thing on publications, we've talked about the quality over quantity. I would say that, if you're looking at your publishing, choose your journals for quality. you know, as much as possible. I don't know that anyone should have 100% Q1 journals, because you also want to think about, why am I publishing? So why are we publishing? Emily?
To disseminate the research that they're doing, so
Yeah,
ideally trying to find clinicians or etc.
exactly.
More research.
So yeah, so we're not just publishing, you know, for the sake of publishing, we're publishing to change people's lives. And if we're kind of aiming for Q1 journals that primary care, for example, never read, then we're not reaching the audience that we need to reach in order to disseminate that knowledge and change practice. So there will be times where you'll want to publish in a Q2 or Q3 journal, because that's the audience that you want to reach. But in general, try and aim for Q1. And I said this yesterday, but in the asthma and breathing program, 89% of our publications are in Q1, much higher than other the mean in HMRI, which is about 67. So we're doing really well with that metric. We talk about it and we aim for that. I've talked a little bit about the positioning that you want to do. I reckon you got to aim for at least 50% first or senior. That's probably that's from reviewing grants. I reckon that's probably a bit of a benchmark. Vanessa, would you agree with the 50 or? So in the first couple of years of your research, during your PhD and immediately post, most of yours are going to be first. They're not going to be senior. But you can still have around 50% around that first position mark. And then as you transition, you'll find that you then get, you know, less first authors, and you'll have a sprinkling of senior authorships through. And then as you get further, you'll get even less first authors and more senior authors. But always kind of strategically check your balance of how you're going with your senior and your first, and try and kind of stick around that level, because once you get below that, they start criticizing you that you know you're a collaborator, not a leader. So also think about building international co-authorship. So this is important as well. And the metrics that you get from SciVal will tell you what proportion of your publications are published with an international author. So for promotion, for jobs, for grants, that's an important metric that people look at also. And when you're selling yourself, use your metrics. Think about your quartiles, your field-weighted citation index, not only for individual papers, but for you. You get a field-weighted citation index for your topic area. Citations, policy sites are really important. How often has your research been cited in policy? And all of this you can get from the tools on the library website that demonstrate policy sites, etc. H-index is often used, but NH and MRC doesn't allow H-index. So, and I think it's probably used less and less in terms of ranking the quality of an early mid-career researcher, because it is biased to more senior researchers who have more time to get cited. So I'm just going to show a couple of examples here of, have we got a pointer? So this is direct from my grant. Don't tell me. But I just wanted to show what you have to do. You have to do your top 10. So you have to have your publication, and then you have to have an explanation. And really what they want you to see are your metrics, your contribution, your impact, and your role. So all the things I've been talking about so far have really related to these things, haven't they? You know, what was your role in this paper? So as first and corresponding author, I didn't know that. I always put first author, but the person that reviewed my grant for me said, well, if you're first and corresponding, then you're even more senior. It's just that, you know, my senior author just hates being corresponding. In reality. So yeah, you know, this one's nice. It's got a nice field weighted. Anything above 1 is above world average. It's in the 98th percentile. It's been cited 192 times. And almost half of those have been in the last 2 years, despite being published 5 years ago. So that demonstrates ongoing impact and contribution. So what did it do? The impact, where's it cited? You know, what did it lead to? Did it lead to those things that you scored on international presentations and things like that? And then what was your role? Like, and those that went to Luke's Learn at Lunch a couple of weeks ago would have shown, might remember that he kind of spelled out these metrics: contribution, impact, and role. So you make it so easy for the reviewer. Publication 3, I didn't put 1 on because it didn't all fit on 1 page. But you know, this one was a scholarly output of an international workshop. So I had 8 primary data papers, 1 international or 2 international society clinical guideline, which had a field weighted of about 30 and 500 citations. So I wasn't first author on that or last author, but its impact internationally was high enough for me to say, you know, this is one of my best. So you kind of got to balance it like that. So there, you know, the examples of how you actually use the metrics to sell yourself in these types of applications. Now, I talked about topic areas and field weighted topic areas. I couldn't say I'm the, like, you know, most published author in asthma. But what I could say is I'm ranked 10th globally for this topic area. And then I went on to say, you know, I'm one of only 2 women and the only non-physician. So you actually bring it back to your discipline as well. So, and another point on this is that, you know, you might have a number of first in disciplines. So I'm the first exercise physiologist to do X. I'm the first pharmacist to lead the Thoracic Society. You know, first in discipline are important things to highlight. And then my topic is, my topic field weighted is 3.3, but the global mean is 1.42. So you can see that, you know, I'm more than double. So you do that benchmarking, and this is really important for promotion applications as well. All right, so just want to say that we do have different CVs for different purposes. So we've said this already, an HNMRC versus a promotion CV. We should have bio sketches, maybe have our ORCID ID, maybe have our LinkedIn profile, identify what your collective and your individual roles. Think about what you're applying for. Is it me or is it we? And one of the most difficult things I reckon with investigator grants is you're not allowed we in there. It's I. Whereas if you're going for something else, you might be promoting the team's role. So it would be we. So irrespective of how uncomfortable it might make you feel, it's part of the job. Now, I just want to kind of show a little video, which kind of shows the benefits of tailoring and, you know, developing your CV based on your strategic narrative. I think when I turned it over to Christy's computer, my link didn't work. That's so disappointing. And I don't know if anyone remembers the scene where the professor says, Miss L, you did good in class today. Are you thinking about applying for my internship? And she says, oh, I don't know. I haven't thought about it. He said, well, do you have a CV? And she pulls it out and it's a single pink piece of paper. And he says, it's pink. She said, yes, and scented. Gives it that little extra something. But I'm so disappointed that won't play. But I do want to say, I think this is really a perfect demonstration of leveraging confidence and creativity to make an impression. So it speaks to Elle's branding. So it's a bold departure from traditional professionalism, but it aligns perfectly with her character, which is celebrating femininity and individuality. And, you know, it speaks volumes about her branding and her strategy, the consistency, you know, pink across her outfits and in her resume, her confidence and her deliberate differentiation. Now, of course, I'm not telling you to go and get a pink CV and spray it with some perfume. I just wanted to make the point about those things, that deliberate differentiation. How do you differentiate yourself from that, you know, 200 other people that are applying? How do you demonstrate confidence? How does your branding strategy work in terms of you selling yourself? How does it align with your strategic narrative? And that's so disappointing. All right, so let me just give some examples. What's the time, by the way? 12:47. Let me give some quick examples about, you know, the types of CVs we developed. This first one is an NHMRC one-pager. Now, I would say that it's not the best because it's got no white space. It does have some headings in a different color. You know, we're forced to use Times New Roman 12 point. It takes up the whole page. The biggest problem with it, I think, is no space there. But, you know, everyone that's written a track record for NH and MRC will know that kind of standard pro forma that we do. And when you're doing an H&MRC track records, always have a look at the grant guidelines because they all change. They're never always the same. So they'll want to know, you know, what your impact is in the last 5 years and your top 5, where others might want to know, you know, your contribution to science and your top 10, for example. So always review them. And don't just kind of, if you're a collaborator on a grant, don't just give them last year's track record. Tailor these to the grant application that you're applying for so that you can show or demonstrate what you're bringing to this based on your background and your track record. Make sure, you know, it doesn't say CIA when you're CIJ. Because the last time you used this, it was for your grant application. So they're just little things that irritate reviewers. This is an example of a 2-pager. So often we have to submit a 2-pager to ethics or to when you're doing a presentation and things like that. So it has this career summary, your narrative, strategic narrative. And I'm not putting these up as exemplars by any means. These are mine, but mine are not perfect. But just to give some examples, career summary, strategic narrative, current appointments, your contribution to the field of research, your international standing, research translation, student supervision, and honours and awards. You might have different topics for different audiences and things. This is a standard one I use and just update their metrics for things like ethics and stuff like that. But you know, yours might look differently and the topic headings might be different depending on what you do. So I don't say, you know, I don't have publications on here at all, but I do say somewhere that I've published how many papers, for example, the types of journals I might have published. And up here, I'll say over the last 5 years, I've delivered this many presentations and things like that. So, you know, building it into a narrative rather than a batch of dot points. And then my last is my full CV. So here I'll have things like an executive summary before going into, so this is just one page. I always keep it one page no matter what. And then I'll go into the more detail. And I've just pulled out some examples of how I do it. But you know, I don't think this is the way to do it by any means, but it's just an example. So this is research funding. So I have what the grant name is, who the CIs are, what my role was in it, like it's unmistakable. It's got a column for its on its own, what the funding scheme is, what the years that they're funded and how much. And I just think in a table like that, it's very clear. You know where to go for the piece of information that you want. Here are publications. So you can see right at the top, I've got a little asterisk for first author and a star for senior author. So you can, and then I highlight my name. So people can see where I am, if I'm first, if I'm senior, and also if the paper's been featured with any kind of editorial or global media campaign or, you know, things that kind of speak to its quality. I'll put it in, I used to do impact factor as well, but it's too hard to keep up with, so I don't do that anymore. All right, so I'm nearly at the end, which is good, I suppose. I might just get, because we're running out of time, but I'll just do some other quick tips. So as you're developing your career in research, I think it's really important that you invest in your development as a researcher. And you can do that by attending training and research and leadership training for research and leadership. And, you know, just things simple like this as learn at lunch and things like that. Because whilst they're not the actual core work of doing the research, it's getting more and more and more competitive every day. So you need to be on top of the game in terms of, well, what's the expectation of me? How do I compare to others? Use Power BI. Does everyone know Power BI? Yeah. Jump on there, compare yourself to level A's, B's, C's, D's, E's in your school, in your college, so that you're constantly kind of knowing how you're tracking in terms of your research development. And that kind of also speaks to building competencies beyond your technical expertise. So I think we've got a great kind of group where people have very specific research skills and technical kind of expertise. But then we have people that also have great knowledge in certain areas so that they can support others within the group. But it's also building your branding as well. So these are my specific skills, and this is a niche for me. Like, you know, I'm the one that has these skills. So this is what I, you know, can hold as my contributions. And also, I think it's important to stay informed of the funding landscape. So get onto emails that tell you when grants are announced and things like that. And think widely. Don't just think about, the big grants. Think about health funds. Think about philanthropy and things like that. So you can kind of go beyond $5,000, $25,000, $1,000 grants to 50,000, 75, 100K with those kind of things, and then kind of building up to the next level. Make impact and translation real. So these are just reinforcing points about linking your work and how it impacts practice and policy outcomes. Recording your impact, I've already talked about with media mentions and stories and things like that. Highlight these in your CV and your grants. And sometimes you might even just get a patient narrative, for example. If you've seen someone in a clinical trial, they might email you and say, I just want to thank you. This study's changed my life. Like, those are important in terms of demonstrating research impact, because you're impacting the community that you're here to serve. These are just customization strategies, which I think most of the things I kind of spoke about throughout. It was just there to remind me in case I had forgotten anything. I didn't talk about formatting and language and consistency in that. So a nice looking document, an aesthetically pleasing document, is always going to go further than, something that looks like you did it in 1984. So maintain your CV, coming back to this lifelong document, have a master and then have tailored versions. I have so many versions where I'll rename it every 6 months. And that way, if I need to go back to the previous 6 months, I'm not just going over the top of each version because I may have lost something. Keep your Scopus and your ORCID updated if you need to do anything. And have an annual review with a mentor or a peer just to check, at least annually. I think everyone should have a mentor to talk about this kind of stuff, but at least annually, so that you can check in and say, how do you think I'm going? And what's your plan? Like, what do you plan to do in terms of publishing in the next 6 months and 12 months, etc. And they're things Dennis and I talk about on a regular basis, don't we, Dennis? Know the system. Learn what the assessors value, because for each grant, and I think this is really important in nursing and midwifery, because often nurses and midwives will write quite differently to what an NHMRC reviewer expects. So you can't just say, but this is how I do it. You've got to change the way you do it. You've got to write for your assessor, no matter what, and position yourself with purpose. My final thoughts are what I started with. Your CV is a living document. Your strategy is a living process in order to actually build your track record and your research career. It should be, it's not just descriptive, but strategic. And it will allow you to drive opportunities and not just report them. But finally, my final point is that when you're doing all this, it becomes very overwhelming. It's incredibly competitive. There's so much going on and you can really burn yourself out. So you always got to kind of keep a check on you and making sure that you're looking after yourself while you're trying to drive this stellar career. Thanks. Any questions? Nope. Useful, not useful?
Very useful.
Good. All right, let's eat pizza. Bye online.